What is sleep on a neuroscientific level?
Let's just ignore the neuroscience for a sec. We have a biological clock ticking inside of us that plays with our hormones, body temperature, and drowsiness. The clock picks up on cues like darkness to decide when to make us sleep and when to make us wake up. But what actually happens when we sleep?
Sleep is characterized by a lack of reactivity to sensory outputs, low motor output, and diminished conscious awareness. There are two main types of sleep: non-rapid eye movement, also known as quiet sleep, and rapid eye movement, also known as active or paradoxical sleep. There are 3 stages of NREM sleep. Stage 1 occurs right after you fall asleep. Stage 2 is when sleep spindles, which are short bursts of high-frequency brain activity, are seen. And stage 3 is deep sleep. In REM sleep, although arousal is inhibited, the brain actually becomes more active. The body becomes more relaxed and immobilized, and dreams can occur. REM sleep is turned on by acetylcholine secretion in the brain and is inhibited by neurons that secrete monoamines such as serotonin. The limbic and paralimbic system, including the amygdala, are active regions during REM, enabling internal information processing and explaining the emotional responses during dreams. The bizarreness of dreams may be due to decreased activity of prefrontal regions, which are involved in integrating information as well as episodic memory.
Now that we know about the basics of sleep, let's take a closer look at the role it plays in learning, specifically in consolidating long-term memories. There are many different types of information that we can learn and store in our long-term memories, including skills like how to drive or play the piano, facts about the world like the name of the first president, and first-hand experiences like what you did to celebrate for your birthday this year. My hamster Star, for example, had a dinner party. In the next slides, to keep things simple, we're just going to focus on episodic memories and what happens to them in our brains during sleep. We'll be taking a closer look at Star's memory of his birthday dinner to illustrate this. Before we go into the neuroscience of what happens to episodic memories in the brain during sleep, it'll be helpful to know a few more details about the characteristics of episodic memories. First, episodic memories involve diverse content, including sensory information, thoughts, and feelings that you experienced. Second, episodic memories also contain a representation of an event's spatial temporal context, which is just the specific time and place in which you experienced the event. A third characteristic of episodic memories is that they include representations of serial order, meaning the sequence of events in which the experience unfolded. And finally, remembering an episodic memory feels like traveling back in time. Let's illustrate these 4 aspects of episodic memory by going back to Star's memory of his birthday dinner. In terms of diverse content, Star remembers a lot of different types of things about his birthday, like the sweet taste of his carrot treat, the smell of pistachio pieces on the table in front of him, and the joy at getting to eat so many of his favorite foods. He also remembers the spatial temporal context of his party, like where he sat at the dinner table and what time his party started. He also remembers the series of events that took place at his party, like how he was first placed at the table, then grabbed and ate the piece of tofu on his plate. When he remembers all these different aspects of the dinner party, he feels like he's traveling back in time because he's mentally reconstructing his original conscious experience of the event. And there's a biological explanation of this, so let's move on to learn about the steps and parts of the brain involved in experiencing an event, and afterwards solidifying a long-term memory of that event.
Experiencing an event. When you're in the middle of experiencing an event, you first receive information about the event by perceiving it through multiple sensory systems, including ones involved in smell, hearing, and sight. These different streams of information are processed in increasingly complex ways as they move through your nervous system and through different cortical regions of your brain. For example, visual information is first sensed through our eyes, eventually travels through nerves to the occipital lobe in the back of your brain, where it moves through levels of visual processing that start out super detailed in processing more basic visual elements like color, orientation, and end up processing more holistic, high-level things like geometric shapes and perception of motion. The seahorse-shaped part of your brain, called the hippocampus, receives high-level sensory information from several different cortical regions, along with emotion and conceptual information from the amygdala and temporal cortical regions. The hippocampus then binds all of these different types of information into a unified conscious experience. As we will see in the next slide, this is related to what the hippocampus does during sleep. The hippocampus integrates and reactivates during sleep. During slow-wave sleep and periods of quiet rest, the hippocampus also repeatedly replays recent memories, which reactivates associated parts of the cortex that have been involved in initially experiencing the event. Therefore, in a sense, the hippocampus is an index. It holds both information from multiple locations and also points you to specific parts of the cortex that were involved in initially experiencing the event.
Okay, but how does information move from short-term to long-term memory? At first, when the brain reactivates a new memory pathway during sleep, it looks like this brain on the left. As we can see, the hippocampus, which is blue here, contains a representation of the episodic features of the memory, and when it's activated during sleep, it triggers different parts of the cortex to activate too. Over time, with repeated reactivations of the memory during sleep, some synaptic connections become stronger, as shown by the thick red lines. Some synaptic connections become weaker, as shown by the thin red lines, or even disappear altogether. And some new synaptic connections in the cortex form, linking the different cortical regions so that the cortical regions associated with the memory can activate together without needing the hippocampus anymore. Therefore, once a memory is fully consolidated into long-term memory, it looks like the brain on the right. In this brain, for the most part, the cortical regions no longer rely on the hippocampus to link them all together. These older memories are more general and conceptual. This may be because the hippocampus is involved in the feeling of actually re-experiencing the event, and in older memories, the hippocampus is less involved in recall.
Let's talk about how memories of movement are replayed in rats during sleep. To help explain this, I'll be using the movie Ratatouille to do so. Remy works his way around the kitchen in a certain order for each of the ingredients and utensils needed for his cooking. Patterns of his movement are expressed in neural activity as he gathers what he needs, and different neurons fire as he moves around. While Remy sleeps, those same neurons fire and replay in places where he has explored but follows random areas. This was discovered as scientist Matt Wilson placed electrodes into the brain and isolated the activity of individual neurons. This allowed him to record patterns and assign them to different directional signals as rats replayed their memories in their sleep. When Remy is moving around and cooking, place cells, which are cells in the hippocampus, fire when he is in a certain location within the kitchen. The hippocampus forms maps of space, and those same cells that form these maps were also involved in forming memories. To form a memory and to be able to recall it, Remy needs to replay the firing pattern during sleep. This can be shown in data as the replay is detectable in the experiment that monitored the activity in a rat's brain during sleep compared to it being awake. In non-REM sleep, memories from the day are replayed and fragmented, and these memories can be replayed forwards and backwards in time. Findings from Matt Wilson. Dr. C explains, when the rat is asleep, the hippocampus is silent, but suddenly lots of place cells fire, then the hippocampus falls silent again. This firing is very time compressed. 1 second of firing activity during wakefulness corresponds to about 10 milliseconds of firing when the animal is asleep. Remy in this dream state replays small fragments of memories of him running through the kitchen, but his place cells fire incredibly quick, unlike when he is fully awake. In these short bursts of action potentials, Remy's fragmented memories in his dream state are replayed in the span of milliseconds.
Now let's look at an example on the relationship between sleep and learning in dogs. This study took place in Hungary. In it, 2 experiments were carried out. In the first, dogs were taught the commands to sit and lie down, either in their familiar Hungarian language or in English, an unfamiliar language. The dogs then participated in a sleep study using electroencephalography, or EEG for short, which is a non-invasive method to acquire brainwave signals from sensors placed on the outside of the skull. In the second, dogs were taught the commands to sit and lie down in English, with 1 hour of awake activity immediately afterwards, either sleeping, walking, learning a familiar command, or playing. They were retested to see if they remembered their new words, and then later retested once more in a week. In the first experiment, the dog's performance improved after their 3-hour sleep study. It also showed that learning new commands influences both REM and non-REM sleep in dogs, supporting the prediction that both kinds of sleep are essential for memory consolidation. In the second experiment, all the dogs in all the conditions, sleep, walk, learn, and play, performed better in the long run when compared to both the baseline and the retest. These findings suggest that memory consolidation occurred during the dog's usual sleep at home, implying that sleep does not need to happen immediately after learning in order for memory consolidation to take place, but should happen on the same day as initial training. In conclusion, this study is the first to prove that sleeping and learning are interrelated in dogs. Further research should explore if, like humans, sleep and memory in dogs are modulated by individual differences.